This is the VOA Special English Economics Report. Energy has become an important issue in the American presidential campaign. And gasoline prices, costs that affect almost all Americans, have risen sharply in recent months. For example, former Massachusetts Governor Mitt Romney has criticized President Obama's energy policy. In a newspaper commentary, he said the president has let prices rise while placing too many requirements on the energy industry. One issue in the political debate is a project proposed by the Canadian company TransCanada. Its Keystone XL pipeline would stretch more than 3,000 kilometers from Alberta, Canada, to several oil processing centers in the United States. If completed, the project would cost about $13 billion and transport over 1 million barrels of oil a day. The Republican Party has criticized President Obama for delaying work on the oil pipeline. Republican Doc Hastings serves in the United States Congress. He says the party wants to use all of the nation's energy resources. Mr. Hastings says that would include use of both the Keystone XL pipeline and oil exploration in coastal waters. He says Republicans in the House of Representatives have passed reforms that break down government barriers to America's natural resources. And he says the House has passed legislation that would open coastal areas to new oil exploration and production. In early March, President Obama visited a Daimler truck factory in North Carolina. He told workers that more oil exploration is not an easy answer to the nation's energy problems. He said the United States has 2% of the world's oil reserves, but uses 20% of the world's oil. He said this means that even with increased oil production, there is no easy answer to high gasoline prices. Workers at the North Carolina factory build alternative fuel vehicles. Mr. Obama told them that new sources of energy mean more jobs. The president has called for tax breaks on clean energy vehicles and urged local governments to buy them. He also has asked lawmakers to end $4 billion in support for the oil and gas industries. For VOA Special English, I'm Carolyn Presutti. You can download texts and MP3s of our programs and learn English at voaspecialenglish.com.
From VOA Learning English, this is the Economics Report. Detroit Mayor Dave Bing had to report some bad news recently. He said Detroit was seeking bankruptcy protection. The move would give the city court protection from creditors. The decision to declare bankruptcy is an effort to restructure and reduce debt. It comes at a difficult time for Detroit. In March, Michigan Governor Rick Snyder named Kevin Orr a bankruptcy expert to oversee the city's financial problems. Detroit has been struggling to reduce a budget deficit of more than $300 million. In addition, the city's long-term debt has increased to at least $18 billion. Detroit's problems have grown over many years. Michigan State University professor Eric Scorsone says the city depended too much on one industry, automobile manufacturing. Jobs with car makers were a big reason why Detroit was one of the country's largest cities half a century ago. In the 1950s, it had a population of about 1.8 million people. Today, the number is down to less than 800,000. Robin Boyle is a professor of urban planning at Wayne State University. He says over the years, many Detroit residents moved to areas outside the city or even left the state. That hurt Detroit's ability to invest in itself. It is rare for a large American city to seek bankruptcy protection. In 1975, New York City came close before the federal government agreed to provide money. Detroit, however, is the largest city to seek bankruptcy. Now, a federal judge is to consider Detroit's request. One of the main issues is what to do about the retirement pay of city workers. Currently, there are many more retired workers than those paying into the pension system. For VOA Learning English, I'm Alex Villarreal.
From VOA Learning English, welcome to Economic News in Special English. Economic growth in East Asia and the Pacific region is expected to reach 7.9% this year. That is higher than in any other part of the world. But that is only part of the story. The other side of East Asia's success includes conflicting territorial claims in the area and trade imbalances with the rest of the world. Competition for natural resources is an increasingly important issue. This has led to territorial disputes. For example, the islands known as Diaoyu in China and Senkaku in Japan are thought to be rich in oil. Areas around the islands are said to be good fishing grounds. China and Japan have competing claims for the territory. Kenneth Lieberthal is an Asia expert with the Brookings Institution here in Washington. He says he has not seen evidence that either China or Japan is willing to reduce tensions over the islands. That means territorial disputes will likely continue. China, Japan, Korea, Taiwan, Vietnam, and the Philippines are involved in territorial claims with neighbors over West Pacific islands. Trade imbalances are another issue. East Asia has long been a source of exports. China's big trade imbalance with the United States has concerned U.S. lawmakers for years. Some blame China's control of its currency for America's big trade deficit, but Kenneth Lieberthal does not think so. He notes other policies. One is China's direct support for many of its important industries with government aid or subsidies. Mr. Lieberthal says Chinese rules at home also hurt countries seeking to export to China. He says these and other issues, such as the abuse of intellectual property rights, have a much bigger effect on America's trade deficit with China. For VOA Learning English, I'm Laurel Bowman.
From VOA Learning English, this is the Economics Report. Economic concerns have been at the heart of the recent protests in Brazil. Brazilian President Dilma Rousseff answered growing public unrest over government spending and economic concerns. On June 24th, she proposed a popular vote, or plebiscite, on a constitutional process to make reforms needed by the country. President Rousseff also described a $23 billion spending plan. The money would go to public transportation and would support investment in education and health care. The Brazilian leader also promised to fight political corruption. President Rousseff met with state governors, city mayors, and protest leaders in the capital, Brasilia. It is estimated that 1 million people took part in protests across Brazil. Demonstrators are angry that the government is spending billions of dollars in public money in preparations for two huge sporting events. Brazil will hold the FIFA World Cup Soccer Championship next year, and then the 2016 Olympic Games 2 years later. The protests started when the government announced it would increase transportation costs such as bus and subway fares. But the protests soon turned to other economic issues and spread. As a result, the government suspended its plans for the transportation fare increases. Demonstrators have been demanding better health care, education, and public transportation, and action against corruption. As Brazil prepares for the major sporting events, the country is also facing rising inflation. The inflation rate is now over 6%, which is higher than the government's target. For VOA Learning English, I'm Mario Ritter.
From VOA Learning English, this is the Economics Report in Special English. Burma's financial industry has suffered from years of mismanagement under military rule. But more recently, the government has pushed through economic reforms. Those measures are changing the nation's banks and re-energizing businesses. There are even hopes that Burma could become one of Asia's fastest growing economies, an Asian tiger. Burma had one of the best performing economies in Southeast Asia before the military seized power in 1962. Many years of state control over the economy followed. Widespread corruption and international sanctions left it one of the poorest countries in the area. Economist Sean Turnell says turning around the economy will require strong measures against corruption. That is why he says political change is important to economic reform. He says restrictive measures make it harder for Burmese to do business internationally. The restrictions on foreign monetary exchange do not only hurt big business. They hurt small businesses too. Here is an example. Nini owns a workshop in Rangoon. He and his family manufacture toys for buyers from all over the world. His toy business is international, but Burma's banks are not. Nini still depends on middlemen called hundis to process foreign money transactions. Foreign visitors to Burma once used black market money changers, and hundis are still the main method for international monetary transfers. But the government hopes this unsupervised cash-based economy is ending. It plans to do this with new ATMs or automated teller machines and foreign exchange licenses for private banks. For VOA Learning English, I'm Carolyn Presutti.
From VOA Learning English, this is the Economics Report. Last week, we reported that international economists released a hopeful report about Africa's economy. The African Development Bank, the United Nations Development Program, and the OECD Development Center wrote the report. It predicts economic growth on the continent could reach 5 or 6% over the next 2 years. Economists expect 7% growth in West Africa's economy in the next 2 years. They say oil continues to be a major source of income, but that other industries are also important. Growth in Nigeria is coming from agriculture, trade and information, and communications technology. Manufacturing is helping Ghana grow. Sierra Leone is the fastest growing country in the area because of its iron ore exports, as well as its agriculture and building industries. In southern Africa, Angola, Mozambique, and Zambia are expected to grow between 5 and 7%. Labor problems and weak foreign export markets have affected growth in South Africa. But that country is still expected to grow almost 3% over the next 2 years. Angela Lusigi is an economist and policy advisor for the Regional Bureau for Africa in the UN Development Program. She says many countries are working to balance their budgets, and they have solid financial policies. She says the next question is how to make those improved policies result in growth that helps all of a country's citizens. She says inequality remains a big problem in Africa. Ms. Lusigi says it is important to have growth that affects all people and not just one group. For VOA Learning English, I'm Alex Villarreal.